So the next speaker is Evan Plant-Weir, co-founder of Mars Society Canada and senior blog writer at the Mars Society.
Hi, everybody. So as mentioned, my name is Evan Plant-Weir, and I'm a senior writer at the Mars Society and co-founder of the Mars Society of Canada. I'm very grateful to be here, so thank you to everybody for this wonderful opportunity. I have no ingenious technical solutions for Mars settlement or groundbreaking research to share with you. Unlike the brilliant individuals I'm honored to be speaking alongside today, I'm not an engineer or a scientist. For the purposes of this talk, I'm simply a storyteller. And as we are all gathered together at this wonderful convention to discuss and ponder the exploration and settlement of the Red Planet, my talk today will be about how our journey to Mars will play an important part in defining our story as a species, the story of humanity. So what is the story of humanity? And where does Mars fit in? Well, of course, the nuance and complexity of that question goes far beyond a 25-minute presentation. No doubt, it will probably take us thousands of years to attempt an answer. But I believe that we can speculate with relative certainty as to how settlement of the Red Planet will impact a central pillar of that vast narrative. To begin, I'd like to pose a question. What is our relationship with life on this world? How do we conceptualize the relationship between humanity and our fellow Earthlings? Now, you may be thinking, this is not a simple question. And of course, you would be right. There are so many perspectives and variables to take into account, it's mind-boggling. And further, this question is complicated by the unpopular yet distinct possibility that life might only exist here on Earth. The only place where we know life to exist is here. And even if potentially habitable planets are common, we still just don't know how likely it is for life to take root on any one of them. Some theories suggest that the genesis of life is fantastically rare, and that it could require the confluence of so many unlikely circumstances that it has occurred only once, or is so thinly spread throughout the universe that the vast distances in time and space between islands of life make them, in effect, completely isolated. Now, that might defy our hopes and intuitions. Given the size and age of the universe, and given that life seems to crop up everywhere it possibly can on Earth, it certainly feels like life should be plentiful beyond the atmosphere. Personally, I hope that's the case, but we simply don't know. Given this possibility, let's return back to that tricky question, but ask it a little differently. What is our relationship with life? Broadly speaking, what is the story of our relationship as humans with the natural living world? Are we a part of it, or does our technology make us distinct from it? Are we allies with it or adversaries? Are we caretakers of life or tyrants? There are, of course, many ways to answer this, but for the purpose of this talk, I'd like to single out one particular narrative which I believe will change in meaningful ways as we reach for Mars and become a multiplanetary species. Consider the following narrative. Humanity, the contagion. Humanity, polluters and destroyers of ecosystems. Earth would be better off without us. Have you heard that version of our story? It isn't hard to find. To one degree or another, this sentiment has become unfortunately common. What's more, it's understandable and at first glance, maybe even justified. For the past few hundred years since the Industrial Revolution, and perhaps as far back as 2,000 years ago, humans have inflicted large-scale damage on our planet. We pollute our air with vehicle exhaust and factory emissions. We pollute our water with industrial and agricultural runoff. We pollute and poison our land with garbage, fertilizer, and pesticides. And in this age of free-flowing information, this harsh reality is ever present in our minds. This is the source of a great deal of guilt and frustration, and sadly, it has become a prominent thread in the tale of our species thus far. So, is this the final word on humanity? Are we to be the antagonists of our own story? Would life on Earth, and perhaps elsewhere, really be better without us? Of course not. Though we don't hear about it nearly as often, humans also do wonderful things for the sake of our fellow Earthlings. We are gradually learning from our mistakes, and most importantly, our recent treatment of this planet constitutes only a small part of our story. That story began about 300,000 years ago in East Africa with the arrival of the first Homo sapiens. They struggled through millennia of immense hardship to carry our story forward to the present moment so that you and I, alive here today, can play our small part in sustaining it far beyond the next 300,000 years. Most of our story so far came long before we began to pollute this planet, and most of it is yet to be written. The ecological irresponsibility that, for some, has come to define our story since the Industrial Revolution is just one chapter of a far greater journey. And the next chapter will introduce quite a different narrative. As we establish a permanent presence on Mars, our passage from the age of spacefaring and into the age of space dwelling will catalyze a fundamental shift, not only in the way that we live, but also in the way that we perceive ourselves in relation to life in this world and elsewhere. Whereas, to a large degree, our rise into a technologically advanced species has been defined as a force for the destruction of life. Our rise into a multiplanetary species will constitute the beginning of a new role for humanity as protectors and stewards of life. Our planet's biosphere has been devastated multiple times in the past. Previous extinction events resulted in the destruction of up to 96% of all species on Earth. It might be scary and unpleasant to think about, but every once in a while, this planet is subject to a massive catastrophe. And there are numerous future threats, not only to us, but all life as we know it. Some of these threats come from human activity, such as unintended consequences of biotechnology and the development of bioweaponry, strong artificial intelligence, and this doesn't mean Terminator robots in the streets. If you're unfamiliar with the problem of AI and existential risk, look up philosopher Nick Bostrom's paperclip maximizer thought experiment. These threats also include, of course, human-caused climate change or nuclear war. And if you're wondering how threatening nuclear war actually is to life on Earth, look up the story of former Soviet Colonel Stanislav Petrov. We literally avoided nuclear annihilation based on a snap judgment by a single individual less than 40 years ago. Finally, these threats might include runaway technology such as nanotechnology. And if anybody wants to learn more about these possible threats, I would encourage you to check out the Future of Life Institute. Now, you may be thinking, well, this kind of sounds like the same old ugly story. To be sure, as always, not all of us will act in the best interest of life on this planet. All the more reason for those of us that are willing and able to pursue the more noble path. And let's not forget, threats to life on this world don't just come from humans. In fact, most mass extinction events on Earth so far have had nothing to do with human activity. There are various natural threats to life on Earth, such as asteroid impacts, bearing in mind that every century there's about a 1% chance of an asteroid hitting Earth that would generate a crater the size of a country. That might sound like a small probability, but on the timescale of a planet, it happens quite frequently. There's also cosmic threats such as gamma ray bursts or solar superstorms, which, by the way, happen about once or twice a century. One barely missed us in 2012, and if one were to hit us today, it would knock out the world's power grid. There's also major volcanic events, such as the famous Yellowstone supervolcano, and there's natural shifts in Earth's climate. Finally, there's the eventual death of our sun. This is all to point out that living on one planet is extremely risky. Further, recall my earlier discussion of the fact that life might exist only on this planet, or that it might be so rare that Earth is an island of life, separated by insurmountably vast distances in time and space from other such islands. Setting aside those important possibilities, consider that even if our galaxy is teeming with life, the only species from this biosphere, the biosphere that raised us, with the ability to travel beyond the atmosphere is humanity. The only ticket off this beautiful, precious lifeboat is us. And without us, sooner or later, our biosphere will be devastated once again. The implications of this sobering reality for our story are immense. There's no way around the simple fact. Ultimately, sooner or later, most life on Earth is doomed without human intervention. We need to learn how to properly take care of this planet. But our duty to safeguard life reaches far beyond this planet alone. Becoming a multiplanetary species and bringing life and the light of consciousness with us is therefore a profound responsibility that only we can fulfill. But it is also a profound opportunity to change the narrative about what it means to be human. By establishing a permanent presence on Mars, the second most habitable planet in our solar system, we will be providing substantially greater security for not only human life, but for life from Earth, generally speaking. We cannot survive without our fellow Earthlings, and so, by necessity, we will bring them beyond the atmosphere with us. The flora and fauna that are essential to our existence on Earth will be just as important to our settlements on the Red Planet. This will not constitute an escape from Earth, but rather the proliferation of life from our planet to a new home and the establishment of a multiplanetary biosphere that spans both Earth and Mars. It is in the adoption of this pivotal role, which the universe has entrusted to us humble hominids, that our story will be redefined. Humans, the stewards of life. Going to Mars won't just provide a crucial redundancy for life. The technologies that we develop by learning to live on Mars will also have a significant impact on our ability to take better care of life on Earth. By necessity, human life on the Red Planet will be a powerful catalyst for developments in areas such as efficient energy and water use, compact, high-efficiency agriculture, leaner, more efficient construction methods, and recycling and waste management, just to name a few. By learning to live on Mars, we will also be learning to shrink our ecological footprint on Earth. It isn't about choosing a different planet. It's about learning to live wisely and responsibly on both. And if you want to learn more about how technology developed for space helps us live better on Earth, take a look at a publication called NASA Spinoff. It details the multitude of ways in which space technology is put to good use within our atmosphere. And while you're doing that, keep in mind that the task of Mars settlement is an initiative in space greater than anything that we've ever attempted. And so the resulting technologies and innovations will be vastly greater in scope and scale than anything we've seen yet. Eventually, as our technologies continue to advance over the centuries, we will become proficient at traveling to and living on Mars. We may or may not choose to terraform, but either way, more and more life from Earth will join us. Our skill as a space-dwelling species will carry over as a general aptitude for settling other worlds too. Ultimately, as we reach out further and further from the nest, bringing plant and animal, insect and microbial earthlings along with us, the story of humanity will become very different from what it is now. Pause to consider this for a moment. In time, by going to Mars and learning to become multiplanetary, the story of humanity will be the story of a collection of ape descendants who, though they once caused great harm to their home world, would one day carry the seeds of life to entirely new beginnings. What a journey that will be. What a profound and humbling purpose we have before us. This story, our story to come, should stir us into action. This should excite us, should drive us to be better, and should prompt us to realize the potential that we have as a people. Not only to be better caretakers of this world, but one day to become stewards and gardeners of life in this solar system and beyond. Now, not only will going to Mars result in this fundamental inflection point in our story with regards to our relationship with life on Earth, but it will also open up entirely new ways for our story to grow and change. Not long after we first establish a permanent presence on Mars, and as it becomes increasingly safe and comfortable, some of us will decide to stay and even have children. Settlers to the red planet will begin to diverge from their parent civilization in interesting and meaningful ways. In order to communicate in a manner which best reflects that unique environment, a dialect will begin to form. Distinctive traditions of Martian art, music, and literature will take root. The crops that grow well and taste good in reduced gravity will form the basis of new styles of cuisine. Martians will find unique ways of having fun and establish new hobbies, sports, and recreation. Novel Martian perspectives and modes of thought will augment our pursuit of science, philosophy, and religious truth. Mars is going to have its own Einsteins and Marie Curies, its own Louis Armstrongs and Agatha Christie's. And as the centuries turn into millennia and our foothold on Mars enables us to settle other worlds, it will generate an abundance of human thought, expression, culture, and tradition. Our story will, in fact, branch out into a multitude of different stories, ever increasingly dynamic and enriched. Now, I know that this version of our story isn't guaranteed, but it's entirely up to us whether we choose that path or not. And there's good reason for pursuing this narrative. It would provide tremendous benefit, not only in the future, but also today. Though it might take us centuries to proliferate life beyond this planet, by starting to write that story now, we can set an important precedent for our descendants. By taking on the monumental and monumentally important task of Mars settlement, we can reinforce a sense of hopefulness and pride in being human. Children born into a world in which humans live and work on Mars will know a humanity that has made a commitment to reach for new and bold beginnings. True, they will inherit the burdens of our remaining social and ecological problems, but so too will they inherit a project of such audacity and optimism that they can see beyond those problems to a broader and brighter future. They will look to the stars, knowing that our collective journey is boundless, and they will be driven by the excitement and anticipation of what comes next in the story of humanity. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this interesting, and I'd love to answer any questions.
Great presentation, Evan. Very insightful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a question from Nina. They say, Evan, I love your speech and so agree with what you're saying. Great plan. But shouldn't we preserve the life of animals and perhaps plants we harvest?
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely preserve I mean, I think this overall goal will be a way of preserving life far beyond that. So I'm not, could you ask the question? I'm not sure that we harvest plants and animals that we harvest. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I can repeat the question, but I'm also just I'm assuming that the person is also asking about preserving the life of animals and plants here on Earth. That's
Mhm.
what I'm thinking the question is, but I'm not sure. So the question is again, but shouldn't we preserve the life of animals and perhaps plants we harvest? Again, I'm thinking that's referring to Earth.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We should preserve life on Earth. And there's so frequently this idea that we have to choose between taking better care of Earth and going to Mars, but it's not at all the case. Those are not mutually exclusive projects. We can do both at once. And as mentioned in the talk, the things that we learn, the technologies and processes that we learn by going to Mars are going to help us do that on Earth. So yeah, for sure, we should do that. And I think this project will help with that. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Next question is from Melody. Hey, Evan, thanks for the speech. It was such a positive message. Just thinking from the other side, do you see the potential of interplanetary wars and how do you think that would play out?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Well, I guess I would say, first of all, I hope that doesn't happen, of course. I hope that um, our transition into space is going to leave that stuff behind. But I would also say that even if that does happen, it doesn't detract from the overall goal of that mission. You know, getting out into space, giving redundancy for life, it's opening the door to a longer future, where I believe that we're steadily on the path towards being wiser as a species, generally speaking. So if we can just keep the door open to the future longer, I think eventually I hope, and I think eventually we will move beyond wars. So if it did come to be that there was some conflict in space, I don't think that would constitute this idea of like, oh no, like it didn't work. I think it would just be like, okay, like the human condition is obviously still present, but we're extending out the time scale of that to give us time to become what we could be one day, which is hopefully not fighting wars. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks a lot. And as we're waiting for more questions, let me ask you one. And this will be a question on this duality or the narrative behind the word artificial. I think when you mentioned the two narratives about humans, or kind of like humans evolving from spacefaring civilization to space dwelling, where do you think, or how do you think the idea of what's artificial or created by humans and natural will change? Because as now we know everything, from the narrative of humanity kind of killing the earth, everything artificial seems to have this negative weight attached to it. But as we're moving toward Mars and other planets, how do you think the idea of something being artificial and natural will change?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. Thanks. I think that that will change in the sense that us reaching out to Mars, I view it as kind of Earth being an organism, a collection of organisms. Like if you look at the human body, we're a collection of smaller organisms, right? And I see humans moving out to Mars as just being sort of the Earth as an organism, providing security and reaching for survival. So in terms of this, this idea of humans being separate from nature or being some artificial imposition onto nature, I think that going to Mars could change that as well, for sure, because it's like we are the Earth reaching out to ensure its own survival. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. This is also a very interesting perspective. And if I might just add very quickly, I think I've heard somebody mentioning on a very similar note to us being the same organism with the Earth, also kind of like the satellites and everything we use in order to look at the stars as creating this artificial eye for the Earth, so that the Earth is suddenly now able to see what's happening outside, and just this very idea of having humanity being this enabler of kind of a new organ for Earth is very exciting.
Absolutely. You know, I'm forgetting where this quote is from. Sorry about that, but we are a way for the universe to know itself. So I think we are very much a part of the natural process of life expanding and going beyond the atmosphere.
Thank you. And we have a question from Robert Zubrin, who
Great.
is saying, what do you think of the slogan, "Together to Mars, then together with Mars"?
Together to Mars, then together with Mars. I love the slogan. Together with Mars. I like the idea of together with Mars, because I think that sometimes there's this idea that humans would be a problem on Mars for potential life there. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think that just as we can be an ally to life on Earth, if there's any life on Mars, I think we can ally ourselves and work in its best interest as well. Does that answer the question? It's an interesting question. I hope I'm doing it justice.
I think it does. But Robert, please feel free to enter your comments in the chat.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Well, what I meant was actually that, together to Mars is self-explanatory. And then together with Mars is that now we have two branches of human civilization working together to take on greater challenges together.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that idea. I believe in it wholly. Our ability to solve any problems in the future is going to be hugely benefited by the dynamism and the added complexity of the human civilization as between two planets. So I love that idea. And thanks, Dr. Zubrin. You are why I'm here. So I'm delighted to get a question from you.
Well, I'm glad you're here too. So I think you're doing a great job with your articles.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Evan, for the presentation and for answering all of our questions.
My pleasure.